Now we're going to move forward with our agenda. The next panel is called China, Mexico, Brazil, and the New Development Bank. How have China, Latin American, and Brics nations uniquely shaped emerging markets? To what extent has the pandemic impacted their potential growth at the cusp of the decade, and how long is the path to recovery? How multilaterals, old and new, like the New Development Bank, can be part of the solution in this crisis? Our panel of experts sheds light on many such pressing questions facing these emerging economies today. The panel is moderated by Dan Keeler. Dan is the Frontier Markets editor at the Wall Street Journal and is responsible for coordinating the journal's coverage of the world's frontier and small emerging markets. He is the editor of the weekly newsletter WSJ Pro Emerging and Growth Markets and is editorial lead for WSJ Pro Strategic Intelligence, an information resource focused on global markets that brings together the news coverage of the Wall Street Journal with the analysis of market intelligence firm Frontier View. Take it on, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. You've saved me explaining who I am. So on this panel, you'll meet 5 extraordinary leaders from a diverse range of businesses who exemplify the energy, ambition, diversity, dynamism, and drive of the emerging markets themselves. As Cornell celebrates the 10th anniversary of the Emerging Market Institute, many emerging markets are celebrating their own graduation as they take their places among the global economic powerhouses. We'll hear from our panelists as they tell us about how their companies and individuals are helping to drive the progress of these dynamic economies and about some of the challenges they still face. Just a word or two about what you can expect from the next hour and 15 minutes or so. I'll be giving each panelist the opportunity to introduce themselves and their company, and then we'll discuss their business and their views on the key themes of the conference. And as I mentioned, we have a very distinguished panel with us today. We have Blanca Trevino, who is the chair of Softec, which is Latin America's biggest IT services firm. We have Chang, who is the chief artificial intelligence officer of the online bank WeBank, which is owned by Tencent. We have Luis Enrique Guimarães, who is the CEO of Brazil-based energy and logistics firm Cosan. We have Dongmei Yang, Managing Director of eFund Management Company Limited, which is the biggest private fund management company in China with, I believe, about $250 billion yuan under management. You can correct me on those numbers later if you like, Dongmei. Finally, we have Marcus Troiko, who is the president of the New Development Bank, formerly known as the Brics Bank. So for the final 20 minutes or so, after we discuss each person's business and interests, we will have a Q&A session with you, the audience. So make sure you type any questions you'd like to ask the panelists in the chat box or in the Q&A panel. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Blanca Trevino, chair of Softec. Blanca, welcome to this discussion. Can you tell us a bit about your business and yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Dan. And again, thanks for the invitation. It's great to be here and it's an amazing conference. So yes, let me talk about Softec. I'm the chair of Softec, and I'm also very proud to say that I'm one of the founders. This is a first generation company. We are, like you just mentioned, the largest IT service provider that started in Latin America. Nonetheless, today we are a global company with presence in the different regions, meaning America, Europe, and Asia, with more than 15,000 associates. The US is our largest market. That probably represents more than a third. Then we have Europe and Latin America. Believe it or not, even though we started in Mexico, today it's our third market. But something that it's interesting, it's probably more than 20 years ago, we launched the concept that today is known as nearshore. It's a trademark. So it was a value proposition for the US that meant that we are offering the services, the IT services that we provide for that market from a nearby location, in this case from Mexico. So because of that, from Mexico, we support the US and from other regions, also India and China and things like that. But that's the reason why today, even though Mexico is our third market, we are still the largest employer of IT professionals, because we have most of the people, the associates that we have to support the US are based out of Mexico, the different delivery centers. We support the largest corporations in each market that we participate, and it's basically around their digital transformation. So again, thank you so much for having me, and I'm sure we'll enjoy the panel.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for that introduction. One of the things that really stands out for me in your background, your history, I guess, is that you're one of the few women in the world who's founded and succeeded in building a major IT company. Do you think it was a harder road for you being female to achieve that?
I get that question so often, and probably sometimes I think that I'm lying, but being very honest, and we have a few women here, and Lourdes knows me for many years, I have to say that probably I never pay attention to being difficult, because the way that I am, I didn't want to do and look, oh, I'm a woman, so things might be difficult. Remember, and you can imagine being an entrepreneur from Mexico in this field, technology, there were so many things difficult around that if I added gender, probably I wouldn't be here. So I push myself to say, don't even think about your gender. This is not about gender. This is about positioning Mexico in this field. Being an entrepreneur in Mexico 30 years ago, when no one understood entrepreneurship, they will say, you're not an entrepreneur, you're unemployed, and that's the reason why you want to call it that way. So to your point, Dan, I think it is not easy, being very honest, it's not easy, but I wouldn't say it has been difficult. And probably the reason, again, it's the way that I normally are. I focus much more on the strengths and the advantages, and I don't want to lose any time saying or making excuses. I understand for some women are reasons, not excuses, to pay attention to that. It was difficult enough to be an entrepreneur, tech company, position in Mexico. So I understand that this is not necessarily true for other women, but in my case, I have been very privileged to have a full family support system. My partners are amazing. The CEOs that I normally probably share panels, conferences, boards, have always been very supportive. Even though I'm from Mexico, you should be in Mexico. It's not just how I succeeded in the world. Working in Mexico, forget about being CEO. In Mexico, you're not expected to work. So no, so very privileged. Let me say that.
Well, so, I mean, thank you for that. That's very interesting to hear. As you mentioned, many women do experience some kind of resistance to moving up the hierarchy or to becoming leaders. Given your experience and given that you now have a perspective on that you probably didn't have when you were first starting out, what advice would you have for other women who aspire to be business leaders?
I would have to say the way that I behave, being very honest, that's what I can share. And that's really not paying attention, not allowing yourself to make excuses about your gender. There is an issue there, but if you focus on that, then you will not be able to move, or forget about moving that, or it's not necessarily the way that you should do it. There are so many things that are also in our favor that we should look at that. And when you pay so much attention to that, you are the ones that it's blocking the way. So my advice would be, don't even think about gender. There is already difficulties enough in the world for people expecting you not to ask for certain things because you're a woman. So do not allow yourself to do that. Think about a professional. You are an executive, you are a professional. So don't think about your gender. That would be my advice. I have never made that. Probably when my kids were born, when my daughters, I did ask, please, I'm a mom, allow me to do this. I have to do this. But I never gave any kind of excuse, not even to myself, not even saying, don't go after this. So I know, and I understand that for some people it's an easy or not necessarily the advice that they expected, but I have to be very honest and say that this is what worked for me. And if you ask the women that work for Softec, that are part of Softec, I do believe that they have the same self-determination. Nothing will stop us. Go ahead and do it.
Well, it sounds like they've got an excellent role model in that respect anyway. So talking of Softec, what role has Softec been playing to help companies cope with the impact of the pandemic?
Well, again, we're a tech company, technology. Who can today question the role of technology right now, right? It's, I think one of those privileged sectors in which we are, like you just mentioned, helping other companies. I mentioned that we support the largest corporations. So imagine the role that technology is playing in order to keep whatever continuity in their operations, right? For example, today I mentioned that we have more than 15,000 associates working in delivery centers, but we were able to move the whole Softex operation for people to work in home in less than a week, because we have the business continuity plans. We do have that. And because we did that in an early stage, we were able to keep that operational continuity for our clients. Think that we have retail companies, airlines, banks. We work in almost every different sector. And for them, it was not necessarily an option that we could tell them, oh, you know what, we have to stop operations or the support that we give you because we're facing this situation. That was one thing. I think we were able to help them to keep the operation running. But the other one, it's this situation also made them understood that they needed this digital transformation strategy. So in the past, probably in some regions, it was difficult to convince them how important this was to have that strategy. But what we saw probably starting in March, April, is that they were more open to hear about that. So it's more, if you're a retail company, how can you improve all the access that you wanted to have to the market? If you're an airline, there were things that you wanted to keep in touch with your frequent flyers. And even gyms, 24 Fitness, that is one of our clients. How can you reach your customers? So I think we help them from two different areas, right? It's definitely allowing them or making sure that they will keep the operation running, because we will keep that. And normally we support them not just in the digital transformation, but also in their critical operations. So we didn't have that option. And we were able to do it with no one in our delivery centers, all of them in their houses. And the other one, like I mentioned, is exploring.
Has that been a nerve-wracking process, or did it feel like you had all the structures in place in order to be able to manage that situation?
We have the business continuity plans from the very beginning. It's key for us, and we should always be ready for that. COVID is one, but it can be whatever time, and for whatever reason, we cannot go to the offices. And for us, it was very clear that we couldn't have our people exposed to being in these large groups. And so we do have those plans in place always. So to implement them took us probably 5 days, no more than that. We started with China and India, and then we moved to Spain and the offices that we have in Europe, and we ended up here in Mexico. And
so talking of disruption, obviously the last 4 years have been, there's been a fair amount of disruption with political changes and the trade war and so on. How has that affected your business, particularly the relationship with the US?
Well, as you know, we have a very close relationship with the US, and I'm sure you know that in probably early this year, March, April, we finally signed the new trade agreement, the USMCA, and that gives a lot of certainty to our clients, right? Because at the end of the day, we've been partners for so long, and we all, meaning the business community, we all agree on the benefits of working together, of partnering together. So that was one thing that it's helping, having that trade in place. That trade agreement gives certainty as opposed to the rules and the things, the way that we should partner. And I cannot deny, and this is very public, that how the relationship between the US and China has been probably difficult. And it's a huge opportunity for Mexico, right? To take advantage of that. We're already very large, one of the largest partners for the US, but this changed. And in our business, when you think about digital transformation, it is important to work closer. And the nearshore value proposition is about that. It's leveraging those geopolitical advantages, the same time zone, that proximity. It is difficult to offer those services from an offshore location. And we do have China and we do have India, but for digital transformation strategies or projects, it is much easier to do it from in this case, from Mexico. So I believe we're facing a huge opportunity, being very honest, with all the things that you can hear about the political climate that, like you mentioned. I don't know what's going to happen, and we were discussing this a few minutes ago. I don't know who, at the end, well, probably we do expect who's going to be the president, but I think we will all agree how important it is the region, meaning Canada, the US, and Mexico. And I believe that we will all, certainly us in Mexico, we're looking at how to leverage that relationship and translate this into an opportunity that we think we can have.
Yeah, no, it's an era or a time of tremendous flux, and obviously even if there is a change of presidency, many of the changes that have taken place over the past 4 years they're in the system. They're not going to be reversed. Absolutely. And you know, it's fascinating to see how Mexico and Mexican companies have fared in that. So thank you very much. It's also fascinating to see how China and Chinese companies have fared in that. So I'd like to bring Chang, the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer of the online bank WeBank, which is owned by Tencent, into the discussion now. Chang, welcome to the discussion. Please, can you tell me a little about your business? I'm sure it's more of a domestic business than Softec is, but I'd love to hear about your business and you know, what your vision is for the future.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here to be with so many very enlightening individuals. About myself, I'm a researcher in the AI field. I've been doing AI for almost 30 years. Got my PhD degree from the US. I taught in Canada, and then moved to Hong Kong. I taught in Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, all in AI. And now I'm working in Shenzhen, China, in this company called WeBank. What we do here is to provide finance for individuals and small and micro-sized companies in what we call inclusive finance. Inclusive finance here means that, you know, China is so big, population is so large. When we look at the distribution of people and businesses, there's a huge number of them living in the long tail. So by that I mean people who cannot easily access the financial services like what we have in the big cities. Now, the other side of the coin is internet technology is very advanced in China. So, so we are taking advantage of that. WeBank is a private bank, the first private bank in China, and its goal is to provide inclusive finance to all these individuals and micro businesses. And today, 5 years into existing, WeBank has 250 million individual users and more than 1 million micro-sized businesses. So most of this achievement is made available by artificial intelligence. I have a team of 200 people here, all top researchers and engineers working in this field. Yes.
Those numbers are phenomenal. I mean, obviously, I come from England originally, so any numbers in the tens of millions sound big to me. But to have amassed that many clients in such a relatively short period of time is really extraordinary. When you think of your business, do you consider yourself to have a sort of social focus to it? You mentioned financial inclusion, you mentioned giving people the opportunity to have financial services that otherwise they wouldn't. Do you see that as a core driver, or is that just a market that you saw that was ripe for development and could provide a sort of very ready source of customers?
Yeah, there are several objectives. The primary objective is to provide social equality, social inclusiveness. And this is the goal that's drilled into the heart of this company. So every employee has this as the main goal in mind. So that is why we see the perfect match of AI and finance, and as well as internet technology. Of course, this is also a untapped market. We believe that if we use the right technology, we can find a new opportunity in terms of growing the business. So for example, by using AI, we can provide 24-hour service using robotic technology. So these robots can imitate the best human service person, and then we can replicate them many times, and they can serve people with their individual need, can personalize to their needs with dialogue systems, with speech recognition, with the customer service, the service quality monitoring. We have a whole array of products, all aiming at providing these quality services. So one analogy we use is to provide VIP financial service to ordinary people. So we are taking the business class services to the economy class.
So, I mean, this is really interesting. One of the themes that comes up in my coverage of frontier markets is this idea of leapfrogging, that, for example, I mean, a key example is mobile money, which has established itself in many frontier markets way before it did in a meaningful way in the developed markets. But it sounds like you're actually providing really kind of high-level services to people who this may be their first experience of financial services at all. When you think about this in terms of the emerging markets and the development of emerging markets and the next phase that we're going to see after this, you know, sort of initial development, do you think that innovations like that will actually help emerging markets to leapfrog past the developed markets in terms of their the sort of technology available to the citizens and the services available to the citizens?
Yeah, I really believe this high tech is part of the solution to engage with the emerging markets. These markets have several characteristics that developed markets don't. So first of all, they may currently be at a low economics status, but those markets are full of young people. They are eager to learn, and so they accept things like AI and internet technology more easily. Plus, the mobile technology is advancing very fast, you know, going from 4G to 5G, especially in China. When you go to a remote area, you turn on your phone, it's just like anywhere in a big city. Connection is very smooth. So given this contrast, we can imagine that if we can provide some kind of services online, and if these services can live up to the standard in terms of providing the services and also reduce the risk. In other words, reduce the costs and increase the benefit. So we can achieve both goals of social equality and the market engagement.
What do you think this will do to the development, the rate of development of the bigger emerging markets? Do you think we'll see an acceleration of that development as these kinds of products and services become more available?
I think so. I think people are, so several forces are at work that move people more accessible to these technologies. People who are reluctant to use these technologies are more accustomed to it. So things like in China, the pandemic has happened in the last decade or so twice, right? First SARS and now the COVID. And that pushed people more online to get their services done. Not just in finance, but also in e-commerce, in education, and it's all across the board. Like, you know, the meeting we are having now, is impossible before. We used to have some very draconian technologies for these enterprise meetings, but today everybody can enjoy meetings on Zoom and kind of this. So this is a sign that the entire market and the population is moving gradually towards online, and online coupled with standardization of these services, including financial services, can really make the spread very, very fast. So I take the analogy in the 1960s when the cars are becoming increasingly available and highways are everywhere. And then something new suddenly happens, which is fast food market and spreading like fire. And today we see these services just like in the 1960s.
Yeah, I mean, talking of the fact that technology enables us to host meetings from around the world, we're now going to leap across to Latin America. Thank you, Chang, for your contribution. I'd like to bring Luis Guimaraes. I got that wrong this time, didn't I? Luis Guimaraes into the conversation. He's the CEO of Brazil-based energy and logistics firm Cosan. Luis, welcome to the discussion. I'd love to hear a bit about yourself and your business.
Thanks, Dan. Your pronunciation in Portuguese is getting better and better. So after Marcos and myself speaks, you'll be fluent in Portuguese, I'm sure.
I hope so.
Great to be here with all excellent people and have this conversation. So I'm Brazilian. I've been 30 years mostly in the oil and gas business. I've worked abroad several times in the UK and in the US. And over the last 11 years, I've been involved with the operations in Brazil, running first Raízen, which is one of the investment companies that Cosan has, which has all the distribution of fuels with the Shell branded network in Brazil and Argentina, a refinery, as well as all the operations in aviation support with fuels and large customers. And on the other side, we are the largest producers in Raízen of ethanol and sugar in the world, as well as energy from biomass and biogas now that we have established our first biogas operation. So It's a renewable company on one side and it's a distribution company also with a retail arm with over 1,200 stores, convenience stores in sites, and now moving to the streets with a Mexican partner now, FEMSA. So Oxo is coming to Brazil as our partner. We are opening up the 2 first stores next week in Brazil with our Mexican partner. Very happy to have the most successful proximity operation in Mexico with over 20,000 stores coming in partnership with us to Brazil. Yeah. And we have a gas distribution operation, which is Comgas, which serves over 2 million customers in the state of São Paulo. And we have also expanded to gas and energy. We see a conversion of gas and power. And we are building operations for importing LNG as well as to bring gas from the fields from pre-salt, which Brazil is very growing a lot over the last years. Then we have a logistic operation which moves grains to the world. So Brazil is the largest producer of soybeans and corn, and we have a railroad that goes to the core of the agricultural area of Brazil, it's the Midwest, and we move a lot of the exports that go to China and the rest of the world, which we believe will continue to grow as Brazil expand the productivity and the quality and the sustainable agriculture to feed a lot of the parts of the world. And last but not least, we have a lubricants operation, which is our most global operation. So we operate not only in Brazil, but in Latin America, as well as Europe and US with the Mobile brand. And we specialize in serving customers to all the segments in industries, consumer, and transport.
So it seems Cosan's obviously got a broad range of businesses, and each of them interlocks with the others in some ways. It feels to me that the company kind of exemplifies that sort of flexibility that you often see from big emerging market companies, where they have to be able to be adaptable. They have to be able to also kind of create businesses that support their own growth. So with the logistics, for example, I think that's part of your drive to kind of support your own development. There's obviously a lot of changes going on, and the pandemic is one of the biggest ones that's causing those changes. And a focus that's developed through the pandemic is on sort of renewable energy and pulling the focus away from fossil fuels. How are you as a company poised to push that forward, to benefit from that, and how is Brazil in general positioned to help with that sort of green transition?
Okay, so let me start with Brazil. I think Brazil is very well positioned to be a green power on this new world, given the already very clean energy and transport matrix. So if you look at our energy matrix, it's close to 85% renewable, including, of course, water, biomass, biogas, and all the biofuels in the energy, as well as solar and wind. We have a big penetration of ethanol in the what we call light vehicles fleets in Brazil, with some states having over 65% of their consumption driven by ethanol, pure ethanol, 100% ethanol in the car. So Brazil is the only country in the world where the consumer have the option to select at the pump, at the site, which fuel he will put. You either put gasoline with 27% ethanol mixed, or he will put 100% ethanol, and you'll be able to do it. So it's a great property that Brazil has created over the last several years, which enables every site, every of the 40,000 sites in Brazil to have the choice for consumers, either a cleaner fuel or a cleaner gasoline, if you will, compared to other parts of the world. So given the penetration of, I would say, the biodiesel and biofuels in general, and ethanol, so the growth of these areas, Brazil has just introduced, it's the first year we are running a very new program, which is called Renova Bio, which is a market-based program that you credit, carbon credit enrollment for the distribution companies to go against their sales of gasoline. So it's a market-based, which you have targets for each of the companies, and you have to buy what we call CBIOs in the market that are produced by the ethanol producers, or it's granted by the ethanol producer. So now we have carbon price in Brazil, and we've seen the of course, the fluctuation depends on the price of fossil fuels and the penetration of ethanol, which I think would be a great challenge and I would say a great learning for the world on how a market-based carbon mechanism will work. So I see Brazil very well positioned for that. We are, just to give an example, then we are exporting pellets of biomass to companies in Europe and Japan to mix with coal and reduce their emissions. We are now using a lot of our leftovers of the production of sugar and ethanol to produce other source of renewable energy. For example, we use all the vinasse, which is basically water with some other elements in it that comes for the crushing of the sugarcane to produce biogas, and then we can either generate energy to put on the grid, or we can compress it and use it in the place of diesel or even natural gas. Just to give a couple of examples, we also are very enthusiastic about second generation ethanol, which will grow the yield of the plantations by 50%. So we're going to be able to produce 50% more ethanol in the same acreage by using the biomass left from the process and using biotechnology to transform in ethanol. So we're already producing 40 million liters per year in our company and exporting most of that to Europe and the US, especially California. And we are seeing the growth. So the pandemic has bring a lot of attention to that. And we are seeing orders coming, we're seeing projects. People want to develop projects because I think it's clear that we need to take care of climate change. So I think the COVID will become a very small problem if we have all the implications of which climate change will bring. So it will be a small problem that we all have passed through. So I think the level of conscience of the corporation, the level of conscience of the society, the level of conscience of government has come. And I think Brazil and other countries like India, which is a big producer of biomass, and the US will be able to help all the countries in the world to reduce their carbon emissions by using more renewables products, which the liquid base is very efficient because the whole infrastructure in the world has been, especially for trucks and cars, has been done on liquids. So transforming to electricity to others will take much more time than looking for ways to use liquids.
Yeah, this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and we're a little bit short on time, but
okay.
You know, some of the things that you're involved with require really significant investments in infrastructure, and that's something that's seen as a stumbling block in a lot of emerging markets, and certainly the frontier markets, is the availability of usable finance. And so you, I think, you know, as a private sector company, probably put a lot of money into your own infrastructure developments, but how do you see that balance working just briefly in future? Do you see there's roles for the development banks to work in partnership with private firms and so on?
No, of course, I think development banks also, but I see very pragmatically, if you look at how much money has been to have been spent by governments to prevent the bigger effects on the COVID, I don't think you're going to have too much available for companies. And we're seeing that in Brazil. So the private sector has taken a lot of the lead in some of the investments were done by or supported by Brazilian development banks. And I see that very important for the capital markets and the credit markets provided to continue to develop in order to be able to fund the necessary infrastructure that's required for the growth of the population, the growth of the commerce, and the transition of energy. But I think it's critical then to always look to allocation of capital or the best allocation of capital for society, and using existing infrastructure for me is key. And again, in a country like Brazil or other developing countries, you cannot have the luxury of to discharge all the infrastructure you have built for years to transform to a different infrastructure because you're not going to have the money. And this is about the electric cars against flex cars and biofuels. So this is a discussion that we could take a full webinar on that. But these are the things I see that markets will need to make a choice because we need to do both things, reduce emissions and be able to produce the infrastructure required to reduce the emissions.
Yeah, and not to wastefully end up disposing of infrastructure that's already been created. I'm glad you mentioned capital markets there and the role that they can play. Our next panelist, Dongmei Yang, is involved in capital markets, and she is the managing director of eFund Management, which is the biggest private fund management company in China. Dongmei, welcome to the discussion. I'd love to hear a bit more about eFund Management, and then we can talk about the role that you play in development of capital markets.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Good afternoon. This is Dongmei Yang from China eFund Management Company. I'm responsible for the global business development and the group's marketing strategies. And it's very happy for me to meet you here on the line, and sincerely hope that everyone is good and healthy. So first, let me give you some hints about the company. eFund was set up in 2001. It is the largest mutual fund manager in China. It offers investment funds and solutions. As the third quarter of this year, the total asset and management was about $270 billion US. So we ranked number 1 in China, 99th in the world. And it is the only Chinese fund management company that has been listed among the top 100 asset management companies. eFund, currently, we serve more than 100 million investors, and nearly 1 of every 5 families are our clients. We are very proud to say that. So our institutional investors include central banks, sovereign wealth fund, pension fund, etc. And for the past 19 years, our mutual fund have paid out more than 200 billion in dividend. generating significant returns for our investors. I think maybe today you might be interested in how the asset management companies in China has been getting through this difficult year. Actually, the whole market has had a big progress during this pandemic with the help of the technology development, just like Mr. Yang introduced. So with the help of technology development, there are some very interesting new trend in the market in Chinese asset management industry. For example, fund sales, more and more fund sales are going online. And also we can see the rise of the live streaming of the mutual fund, etc. So here, maybe later I would like to share with this.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think that's very interesting. You know, we've touched on financial inclusion, we've touched on funding for capital markets. You know, you're talking huge amounts of money under management. And I think one of the things that I've heard has been happening is that more and more individual investors in China are taking positions, and it's fairly significant. You know, they're moving their savings into the capital markets through vehicles like yours. What role do you think that's going to play in the future? I mean, that seems like a significant step in terms of maturity of the market. So what role do you think that the private individuals will play?
So I think for eFund, it is a asset management company. So mainly it will play three roles in fulfilling China's industry development. First, as a professional institutional investor, fund companies play very important role in the allocation of capital market resources. This is the most important, I think, by carrying out in-depth researches and exercising value investing philosophy. eFund channels its capital to good industries and enterprises to support high quality economic development. So second, we also provide professional financial management services to average citizens and offer them very good returns. With the rise of personal wealth in China, mutual fund products have become an important tool for family financial management. So in the past about 15 years, the annualized return rate of the active equity fund index achieved about 16%, and the annualized return rate of the fixed income fund index near 7%. So the return is really good for the individual investors in the Chinese market. So thirdly, we help improve the capital markets. A well-functioning capital market plays an important role in the development of the emerging market economy, I think. The development of the fund industry plays a positive role in promoting efficiency and the liquidity of the capital market.
Yeah, and how have recent events affected your company, do you think?
Yes, I would like to share this. So we find some very interesting new trends in the during the pandemic this year. And so first of all, the outbreak of the pandemic has not affected the marketing of our products at all. Instead, it has driven the asset under management of mutual funds to grow very rapidly, which increased from $2.2 trillion at the beginning of this year and to $2.7 trillion at the end of September, which that is over 22% of growth within the 3 quarters of a year. So these are the mainly 2 reasons, I think, for the rapid growth. First, the market sentiment is good because China is in a very good control of the COVID. So the second is the progress of the technology advancement. We used highly improve the efficiency for the capital market and also the financial products. Now, with the development of the internet technology, now professional investment managers like us can directly reach investors through online channels. And investors can buy investment products very convenient, anytime and anywhere. So because of the development of the internet technology, the sales of mutual funds are not affected by the pandemic at all. Instead, the business is booming. For example, the total asset under management of eFund increased 13%. So during the first 3 quarters, this is the big trend. So if we would like to narrow down, there was a very interesting thing here. So during this trend, we also see the rise of the live streaming. So before the pandemic, online marketing campaigns of mutual funds, such as posting posters and short videos through social media accounts already exist. During the pandemic, because restrictions over offline roadshows, mutual fund product marketing increasingly relied on online channels. So meanwhile, live video streaming has become popular in China in recent years. I will give you an example. On October 21st, just less than 2 weeks ago, the most 2 famous live streamers in China has had over 300 million viewers and sold over $1.3 billion of goods just within a few hours. So that's incredible. The rise, the rise of such platform provided a brand new channel for fund companies also. The fund company joined the live streaming wave, and more portfolio managers found themselves communicate very directly with the investors, large or small, and sharing their investment perspectives through live streaming. So now it is typical for a fund company to hold an average of 1 or 2 live streaming shows every day, and some even have 3 or 4. So the fund industry is really undergoing a communications and marketing revolution here.
That's extraordinary. It sounds like the fund management companies are becoming more like entertainment companies in a way. And the flows of money that you're talking about there are phenomenal. That must create challenges for managing that, though, when you're talking about billions suddenly appearing in the space of a few hours. Does that create additional challenges for you, for companies like yourselves? Sort of dealing with those sort of large, sudden flows of money.
Yes. So first, we're happy to have more and more investors and more asset under management. Of course, this creates new challenges for fund management companies, because it will be a challenge for the performance. It will be a little bit more difficult to manage a large amount of money, a small amount of money. But this is anyway, just like I said, is about 30% of increase of the asset under management. But with the development of the Chinese financial market, more and more the top asset management companies has been developed a lot according with the development. So we are one of the leading companies. We are able to manage the large amount of the capital. And we still believe that in the near future, and more assets will come into fund management companies, because the market anyway is still an emerging market. It has a long way to go.
Yeah, well, it sounds like that. Really interesting to hear about those sort of recent developments and the kind of acceleration of that as the effects of the pandemic have become clear. Thank you so much for that, Dongmei. I'd like to bring Marcus Troiko into the discussion now. Marcus is the president of the New Development Bank, which was formerly known as the Brics Bank. Marcos, welcome to the discussion. You're now the president of the New Development Bank. Can you tell us a bit about the bank's mission and the history, and a bit about your path that took you to become the president?
Thank you very much, Dan, and hello to everyone joining the panel. It's really a pleasure at the important occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Emerging Markets Institute at Cornell, headed by my friend, Professor Lourdes Casanova. So yes, Dan, I mean, I've been elected to this position last May, and I've been in charge since early July. The Brics story initiated as reflection on the future, the bigger and bigger shares that Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa would represent in global GDP. This is what I call Brics 1.0. It's very much the work of Goldman Sachs some 15, 18 years ago. But then this evolved from being a concept that defined the countries to the countries defining the concept itself. We moved to what we could call the Brics 2.0 phase, in which the building of institutions is one of the elements. And the most visible and concrete result of this dynamics is the New Development Bank, an institution that did not exist 5 years ago, and now that features a loan book north of $20 billion, which I think is truly remarkable. So we are supporting infrastructure investment and sustainable development in areas like water sanitation, water access, transportation, smart cities. And we are very mindful of the very nature of the evolution of infrastructure going forward, in which the traditional difference between physical infrastructure and digital infrastructure will probably merge into something else, especially in this with COVID or post-COVID world. So yeah, for us, the challenge is not only complementing the existing multilateral development family in terms of providing sovereign-backed loans to countries, but also coming up with new ideas of development, strengthening hubs for international cooperation. The world in which we're living in today is presenting a major deficit, a major deficit in international cooperation. So when you have countries as different as Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa coming together and working constructively on issues where they have shared interests, I think this is truly valuable. And prior to that, I was Deputy Minister of the Economy in Brazil for foreign trade and international affairs. But I mean, I've had many incarnations. I was in business, I was in academia. So I'm very enthusiastic about the mission I'm at right now.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, really interesting what you're saying about the fact that you've got these different countries coming together at a time when there are increasing divisions developing in the sort of global economy and politically. How do you, given that that's kind of your mission, how does the New Development Bank differ from other development finance institutions, or does it indeed differ?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways. The first being in our own articles of agreement, then sustainable development goals is present as part of the mission statement. So very much focused on sustainable development. It's a bank that was set up by emerging economies, so you don't have the traditional advanced economies of the G7 participating, though we want to live up to the name of our institution. It's not only going to be a Brics bank, but it's going to be a new development bank. So membership is open to all members of the United Nations. And I think the most specific incremental contributions that we're going to be making this next cycle of 5 years has to do with the evolution of the concept of infrastructure. Let me give you one example. The other day, I was speaking to this very prominent public intellectual, and I asked him what he thought was the toughest infrastructure challenge that we're living in the world today. And he said, Marcos, I think the top infrastructure challenge is the fact that you have about 500 million children 500 million children in the world today, that because of classes not being taught in person and social distancing, and that these children do not have the basic elements of connectivity to allow for some sort of distance education. So that is infrastructure as well. That's infrastructure. So one infrastructure has to do with the 20th century challenges, and the other one has to do with the fourth industrial revolution, where we're going forward. So being there not only in terms of the finance mechanisms that we put in place, but also in terms of the new development policies that have to be part of that. That is to say, having the bank as a convener of different institutions and ideas is something that I think really will be an incremental, positive difference point in terms of how the NDB compares to other more traditionally established development institutions.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that. It's refreshing to hear that too. One of the things that I personally got quite excited about recently is the concept of blended finance. I'm sure you're familiar with it, the idea that you're bringing together public sector, private sector, development finance institutions, philanthropists, I mean, anyone that has an interest in development. Is that something that you feel has a lot of potential? Because I've heard about it. I haven't yet seen any really good examples of it in practice.
Right. No, I do think it's possible, and of course there are going to be degrees of blended, and there are. I understand that for this to work well, you have to identify those pilot projects in which you can have the most exponentiating effect. But yes, Dana, there's no other way rather than bringing more different actors into providing for the infrastructure challenges, especially because we're living in a particular juncture where you have an extraordinary paradox. On the one hand, this huge level, enormous amount of savings that are not being absorbed in the form of investment. They are out there. And the other hand, this dearth of projects that are multilaterally bankable. And the way to make them multilaterally bankable is to allow for the crowding in of investors. So yeah, we're going to go more and more into that direction. So more PPPs, more project finance, more mezzanine architectures that will also encompass this other actors in the private sector.
Right. Well, so we obviously have a lot of private sector actors in this panel. As you were listening to their comments earlier, were you coming up with ideas for how the development bank could partner with them to further your mission and theirs?
Absolutely. One of the challenges that we have at the New Development Bank is making ourselves known. It's a challenge in visibility. It's a challenge in complexity because, as we go forward, we have to move beyond the traditional loan architectures that are backed by sovereign guarantees. So yes, there is a challenge in complexity, but there's a challenge in visibility as well. When I tell people, for example, that we now feature 60 projects nearing 21 billion, that was everywhere a surprise. And this year, for example, we were one of the most agile institutions in providing a response to the COVID crisis. We came up with a $10 billion facility, half of that targeted health-related aspects, half of that targeted economic recovery. And yes, I mean, we're very open to each of the participants here, especially then as in this next phase of 5 years, we're going to have more players in the bank. I mean, we're working towards expanding membership. So even the global outreach of the bank is going to be one of its most important features, because unlike other institutions, we don't have any geographical limitations. We can really be the global bank for emerging economies this next set of years.
Yeah. I want to bring you back to the pandemic again. Sorry about that. I know it's a constant theme. You've been doing a lot of emergency lending, as far as I understand. Is that distracting the bank from its primary mission?
I mean, not really, not really. Yeah, at the end of the day, you have to respond to economies getting restarted. So it is part of the bank's mission as well. One important part of that investment, especially the second half of the emergency program that we have come up with, is going to go to small and medium-sized enterprises and their infrastructure of business. So I think it's completely under the umbrella of the mission that the bank is set out to do. What is challenging, I think, going forward is identifying those projects that can have the most impacting development for the dollar in a world in which you have the characteristics that we're talking about here, so that you can go to work without necessarily going to your office, where you can have distance education, where you can work on services based, where connectivity is the most important infrastructure link. So we want to make sure that we're there. So it's interesting. We have to use the 21st financial tools to answer for the 19th and the 20th century traditional infrastructure projects, and at the same time, be there for the infrastructure that's needed for the economy 4.0. So it's not like we could afford a strategy in which you get everything solved before looking into the future. We're going to have to attack both at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's a similar sort of point to what Luis was making earlier, this kind of bridging the two, bridging that divide. So yes. I'm going to open this up to more of a group discussion now. One of the questions, or one of the trends that I've been watching for a while now, is the growth of intra-emerging market or South-South trade. And my sort of theory a long time ago when I first got into emerging markets was that eventually they would emerge, or that they would become less and less dependent upon the fate of the so-called developed markets. Blanca, actually, I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Do you think that recent events have bolstered that sort of trend of emerging markets becoming more independent of the developed markets and really emerging as a force to trade amongst themselves, or do you think it's perhaps hindered that development?
I wouldn't be so sure about the answer, because yes, you do see companies from those emerging markets playing such an important role by themselves. I think about the multilatinas, if you want to consider that, and in a certain way they didn't behave as a companies coming from emerging markets. Nonetheless, and they play in very mature markets in a very strong way. I mean, not necessarily be perceived as an emerging market, but I cannot deny that things are changing in a certain way. A lot of countries are trying to not get into this globalization. In a certain way, they are trying to go back and be more independent. I wouldn't say that this is something that is going to last. I truly believe in this collaboration and how emerging markets can really be incorporated and take advantage or play a more important role when they move, or when they have companies that move to those more mature markets. So I wouldn't be so I don't know, straight answer about to saying is it something that can happen. I truly believe that it's more related sometimes to the industry, that it's allowed to that, but the kind of companies that are part of those markets. And you see very successful companies that you never think that they come from one of the Brics or one of Mexico or Brazil. They do play in a very mature market, and they do play strongly. So I don't know if that will answer your question, but I truly believe that you could not say something that would happen just because you're part of that market. I truly believe that also we should be incorporated. I mean, meaning taking advantage, moving forward, and being. Take a look at China. I don't think that they are still part of the BRIC. They are a very, very, very mature market, not necessarily any more emerging market. But we'll see. I will see, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting to look at that label. I mean, I look at this because I cover frontier markets, which is another label. I'm sure a lot of people that are operating in emerging markets don't think of themselves as such, but that is a whole webinar in itself, I'm sure. Marcos, I think you wanted to add something to that.
It's very important to have the big picture in mind, then, because if you think of the year 2019 alone, we were eyewitnesses to a major eclipse in global economy. So if you take the G7, the United States, Japan, Germany, the UK, France, Canada, Italy together, and you measure their GDP at purchase power parity level, that is $40 trillion. Okay, so G7, $40 trillion. Whereas in the E7, so China, India, Brazil, Russia, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, their combined PPP measured gross domestic product is 53 trillion.
Wow.
Right? So E7 53, G7 40. And what are the practical examples that this sort of situation allows for? Take this year alone, okay? So 2020, from January to October, a country like Brazil exported more to Hong Kong than it did to the United Kingdom. Brazil exported more to Bangladesh than to all Scandinavian countries combined. Brazil has exported more to Thailand and Malaysia than to Germany and Switzerland combined. So if you talk about, there's a lot of discussion today about deglobalization and how protectionism is gaining ground. It is true, but it's also allowing for other things to arise, and that has a lot to do with this, I think, unstoppable phenomenon of the growing importance of emerging economies.
Yeah, and I think the unintended consequences of protectionism as well. I think you're talking about that too. So we do have a question from the audience that relates to inclusive finance. And Chang Yang, perhaps you can start on this one. The question is, it seems that inclusive finance is a theme in today's panel. What role does inclusive finance play for the future of the emerging markets?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think I very much agree on the discussion on the label. The emerging market and frontier market are very much the same. I think inclusive finance will piggyback on the advance in technology. In fact, when we look at how technology has moved, AI has recently exploded with its usability, especially with the technological advance of deep learning. With that, there's in fact an inclusive application of AI. Used to be AI was the toy of a few elite universities, labs, but now AI is everywhere. In China, you can, if you use your phone, you are using AI. If you walk on the street, if you shop, you're using AI. If you take a class, you're using AI. So now AI is entering everyday life and all walks of business. And with that, we are also seeing a tidal wave change in terms of how the services available to an elite field are now it's possible to make it available to the masses. So for example, I still take this analogy of restaurant food. Used to be you walk in a expensive French restaurant and you get very elite services, and the masses cannot enjoy that. But now with the availability of the fast food restaurants, the highways, the cars, and the standardization of the menu, suddenly this standard version of the food is available to everybody. Similar things are happening to services in finance, especially inclusive finance, that we are enjoying not everything that the VIP is enjoying, but the essential things are made more available to the individuals. So there's a large sector of the 250 million population that are WeBank's customers who never had a bank account before. They are for the first time, they just have their first bank account is the mobile bank account. So this, I think, itself says a lot about the emerging market, embracement of the new technology.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just as you're talking there, it feels like throughout this discussion, it's maybe not just about inclusive finance, but it's inclusivity generally. I think that comes into what Blanca was talking about, Luis to an extent, Marcos definitely. There's this sense that technology is enabling sort of democratization, or everything's much more available. And, you know, it's really heartening to see sort of business leaders like yourselves who are sort of passionate about increasing access to your services and making things more available, more easily accessible. We have one question which focuses on supply chain, which I think I might ask Luis to tackle. What do you think are the trends in terms of global supply chain transfer? Is that something that you could talk to us about?
I think that technology, as we discussed, is enabling much more cooperation between buyers and producers and logistic companies. So I think it's continuing a massive evolution in efficiency about how we move things around the world that are physical. Right? We move a lot of digital stuff, a lot of electricity, but a lot of the things will continue to move physical. So I think we'll be intermodal, we'll be much more intelligent in barks, in everything, in trucks, in rail cars, in ports, and ships, etc. So we're going to have much more visibility and transparency on the supply chains, and ability to plan and replan and correct as also as natural phenomena will impact, like rain in certain ports or other types of events. So I see a lot of embarked technology and digitalization in enabling supply chain to reduce costs. And I think the whole efficiency is very important, because one way to have a more sustainable economy is doing more with less. And so we always think about changing things, but we sometimes forget that if you use less diesel on the rail cars, on the railroads, I'm saving a lot of carbon emissions on that. So we really believe in our group of investing in increasing the efficiency and increasing our intimacy with our customers and suppliers in order to have a seamless supply chain working in tandem with the market. It's a market push environment, and we need to follow that.
Yeah, so thank you. We've been talking about emerging markets as a sort of homogenous block, which obviously they're not. And just this year, really, China has just pushed so far ahead in terms of its recovery from the sort of pandemic-induced slump. This may be a bit of a contentious question. I hope somebody's prepared to tackle it. But do you think that China's sort of really rapid recovery and possibly even accelerated development as a result of what's been going on for the past year or so, slightly less than a year, actually could threaten the prospects for other emerging markets, or is it a case of, you know, rising tide lifting all boats? Marcos.
Some historical perspective here, Dan. If you think back to the year 2000, China-Brazil bilateral trade was $1 billion a year. Today, Brazil-China trade is $1 billion every 72 hours. So, and this, I'm giving you the example of China, but I could give you the example of India as well, because for the past 5 years prior to the pandemic, India has outgrown China in percentage terms, right? If you think about this entire region here, it's the theater of history seems to be moving this way. And it so happens that it sort of creates, once again, that Ricardian world in which those countries that have agricultural and mineral goods can contribute very much to their macroeconomic performance by exporting to this region of the world. And if they are smart, if they're strategic about this trend and using the resources and becoming tech-intensive economies themselves, so the rise of this giant, I think, is more of a benign fact than otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have about just a couple of minutes left. Does anybody else want to offer thoughts on the rise of China and its impact on other emerging markets? Blanca, I'd love you to jump into the fray here.
So the question is how emerging markets can benefit from this. Can you ask me the question again?
Well, so the rise of China, the recovery of China and its continued development, it does seem to be kind of accelerating away from other emerging markets. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to agree. That's the reason why I said when we think about China as an emerging market, I keep questioning it's so completely different and the way that they recover. We do have a small operation in China, and I'm always surprised at the kind of things that they have been doing. I will agree with Marcos that I truly believe that the way that they're recovering, it's I think he used the word benign, but I'll say yes. Let me use it from a different perspective. From a different perspective, and don't take me wrong. Because of the way that they have been growing, because of the way that what they have been doing, and the way that they are perceived, at least till yesterday from the U.S. administration, it has opened an opportunity. I mean, it is a different question. It's probably not the way that you expected, but probably because how well they are recovering, how they are perceived as such a strong competition to the U.S., there are opportunities for us. It's different than the question that you asked. But I have to agree with Marcos, because we're just in time. I have to agree with Marcos. I truly believe that what they are doing, it's going to help emerging markets. And again, because I don't see China as an emerging market. But I have to go back to what I said in the first question that you asked me. We see an opportunity. We see an opportunity. And let me take advantage of the last 20 seconds. I'm so glad that it seemed like this panel was about technology. You made my case. No matter the industry, we have seen and experienced how technology, how almost every company is a tech company today more than ever. Again, we're here because we can leverage technology, but all of you answer questions very related to technology and how it has been helping you. AI, how can we question about AI and what we're doing? So thanks again. Thank you. And thanks for making my case or our case about technology. Thank you, Dan.
Well, Blanca, I'm so glad I asked you that question because you just saved me wrapping up this whole panel and telling everybody what it really was about. Thank you for that expert summary of what we've just been talking about. That does bring us to the end of our discussion. I would like to thank you, the audience, for listening in. And I'd also like to thank our 5 excellent panelists for a fascinating and enlightening conversation. Blanca Trevino from Softech, Chang Yang from WeBank, Luis Enrique, I'm going to get it right this time, Guimaraes, CEO of Brazil-based energy and logistics firm Cosan, Dongmei Yang and Marcos Troiko from the New Development Bank. Sorry, Dongmei Yang from the eFund Management Company. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for listening in.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.